Julius, you might as well. You're right next to me.
All right, thank you so much for that very warm introduction. I'm David Arinze, like she rightly mentioned. It's such a pleasure to be here. I serve as the global focal point for the SG7 Youth Constituency. But I also work in Nigeria as the program officer at Diamond Development Initiatives, who are also implementing partners for the United States African Development Foundation in Nigeria, where I lead the off-grid energy portfolio. Now to the question. COP has been fantastic. I don't know if that has been everyone's experience here. One of the things I would say has been a highlight for me is to see that loads of different organizations, countries have seen the need to mobilize relevant financing, and there have been very huge announcements, and I'm excited about that. The low light for me is, or what, I shouldn't preempt the low light, but one of the things I would say is, I don't want COP to be a talk shop, and so there were quite a number of announcements in COP26 in Glasgow, so I don't just want a situation where there are just a lot of pledges and there's no relevant action to back it up. So I would just say that for me, I just don't want a lot of talking, but I would like to see much more action.
And that might be a key point about implementation that we pick up in the discussion. Please, if you're online, feel free to put in the chat your highlights and lowlights. And please, if you're sitting here, feel free to tweet. In particular, around Power Up Everyone is the campaign, hashtag Green Power is a must. Or, of course, any of these brilliant organizations here on the panel. And moving next to New Energy Nexus, who are a member, indeed, of the Power Up campaign. Julius.
Thank you, Harriet. My name is Julius Mujuni. I'm the country director of New Energy Nexus in Uganda. Our work focuses on supporting last-mile clean energy entrepreneurs to bring various clean energy technologies in communities that need them the most. We do this by providing energy loans, as well as mentorship and coaching, among other things that we do. I'm happy to be part of this panel, and I look forward to the discussion. One of my highlights, of course, is the fact that this COP actually got to happen in Africa. That was really great. The low light, I would say, we needed to have more spotlight shine on the energy access activities and projects. So, yes, something has been done, but I wish we would have seen a lot more. And over to you, Harriet.
Thank you so much, Julius. And we have now over 50 organizations supporting the Power Up campaign. It's growing every day. And please, if you would like to join, get in touch. And they include organizations like New Energy Nexus, really working in the front line, through to some of the global powerhouses helping push this agenda forward, including at the level of the United Nations, such as SE for All. So, Jem.
Thank you, Harriet. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jem Porcaro. I'm the head of energy access at Sustainable Energy for All. We really have the honor of having fantastic partners like Ashton and many others. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, we were born out of the United Nations as a special initiative back in 2011. Our mission is basically to help countries achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is universal energy access. So much of what we do is about building ambition, building partnerships across governments, industry, development partners, increasingly providing countries with technical assistance to help them achieve both energy access as well as clean energy transitions. My highlight is, I think, kind of coming into COP, and I think this will become a trend moving forward, is energy access used to be kind of the orphan child of climate change, and I'm beginning to see these two issues merge in a way that could be very helpful for the access agenda. Now there's a lot of talk about clean energy transitions and embedding access within that, and I agree it's fantastic that this COP happened here in Africa, because that is the opportunity to merge these two really interconnected agendas. I guess if there's a low light, I mean, I don't have many low lights per se, but I think one, and maybe I'm channeling my fantastic CEO Demolola here, is I worry about perhaps the sense of urgency around access. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the sense of urgency around climate change for obvious reasons, but let's not forget there's a kind of a silent crisis in the global south as it relates to energy poverty, people dying for a lack of access to power, not enough jobs because of a access to power, agriculture, so on and so forth. So I just hope we can build a little bit more urgency around the access agenda as we have done with climate change.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your highlights and lowlights. And as you say, there are still 600 million people here in Africa with no access to energy. And that's why we've got to push that agenda forward. And at COP this time a year ago, the COP26 president, Alok Sharma, said that the promises of Glasgow would wither on the vine if there wasn't urgent action. And so this was going to be the implementation COP. Have we seen that? Has it been an implementation COP, or has it been a COP out? Who wants to answer that? Who's going to jump in first? I can see James ready
I'm happy to
go.
jump in. Look, I think it's somewhere in between. Has it been a full success? Is this the implementation COP? Probably not. But has this been a galvanizing moment for the access agenda? I think to some degree it has. I think we've seen a number of really important and notable announcements and commitments made here. I'll mention a couple. For those who follow kind of the access agenda in Africa, you might know that there's a real dearth of finance that goes into access in Africa. And so one of the things that we at SE for All, along with our partners, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, launched here is a new Africa Carbon Markets initiative, which is really aimed at trying to leverage the carbon markets and get Africa better access to this really important form of carbon finance that can accelerate access. I mentioned the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. This is a new alliance, a philanthropic initiative that's supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, Bezos, IKEA. They've committed over $1 billion of philanthropic capital to both access and transition issues. The World Bank has recently launched here a major new kind of doubling down commitment towards access called DARES. This is a new kind of program focused on upscaling, particularly distributed renewable energy. Power Africa has committed $47 million to health facility electrification. IRENA has done the same. Selco Foundation also committing to electrify and solarize 25,000 healthcare facilities in India. $500 million of additional philanthropic capital committed by a handful of foundations towards clean energy transitions in the global south. So there are some significant commitments coming out of this COP. Are they enough? That's the real question, but I'll maybe stop there.
David, that was quite a catalogue of announcements. What do you feel? Is that helping you put a smile on your face?
Yeah, sure. Being an African COP, and seeing that this sort of initiatives are being launched for Africa, or in Africa, it's really exciting to see, because you can't really do anything without relevant financing. Like everything falls on the altar of the finance table. So if we do not even mobilize relevant financing, we would not get to where we want to get to on the energy access journey. However, with these announcements, it gives us a sense of hope, gives us a sense of fulfillment that we will begin to see actual boots on the ground. And another thing that it does as well is to give us a call to action to hold those who have made these announcements accountable. Because it's one thing to say fancy words, but we want to see that those words that have been made, those pledges that have been made, those initiatives that have been launched, we get a clear-cut direction of what they would achieve, how they would be implemented, and what results we're expected to see, and what are the timelines, And so this is, so for me, it's a lot of hope, and I'm really optimistic on what the future holds. Thank you.
Combined with, I love that emphasis you're putting, David, on accountability. We're all about to leave COP, and in just a few days, how will we make sure that some of these promises really are delivered, as you said, with boots on the ground, which really brings me to you, Julius. I mean, in particular, one of the calls of the Power Up campaign, and one of the big issues I feel that's been a theme at this COP, has been around adaptation finance. So do you see that beginning to flow? Do you, you're in your work in Uganda, can you get the finance you need?
Thank you so much, Harriet. So what I've experienced personally in Uganda is that even with all this financing, sometimes there's a lack of linkage in terms of how financing, for example, is designed to work on the ground. I think what I get to see is that, even though there are so many of these announcements being made, you see them being made, for example, around results-based financing. And what we've seen actually happen on the ground is that this usually tends to target companies that are into manufacturing and for a specific period of time. So what usually happens is once those projects come to the end, these companies tend to pull out. And this is not to really criticize results-based financing, but I think we really need more innovation that is able to sustain projects for the long term in these hard-to-reach communities to make sure that energy access projects are sustainable, but also targeting the right communities, not just for 2-3 years, but for a very long time to come in the future.
So what kind of finance would you like to see? Is it from government? What are you looking for?
Particularly for New Energy Nexus, we are looking at, grants. I think this is what is needed to really unlock these hard-to-reach markets. We believe that for energy access projects to be successful, there's always going to be people who are being left out, who cannot be served by necessarily, let's say, typical financial institutions. So you need organizations that have innovated around financing that truly targets low-income earners and truly makes sure that, those that really need these technologies are able to access them. And currently, we don't see a lot happening to really target these low-income earners and make sure they also get to really access these technologies that we see on the market.
If I may jump in, all right, thank you so much, Julius. I can't agree with you more, and I would just like to put a spotlight on the model we currently have working in Nigeria, and not just in Nigeria, but through the over 20 countries that USADF works in Nigeria today. So as USADF, that is the United States African Development Foundation's implementing partner in Nigeria, for the off-grid energy portfolio every year, just to bring it home, every year we fund between 10 to 15 renewable energy companies. And this is a blended financing, both debt and grant, and each company, most of them may have or may have not even deployed a renewable energy solution before. So for us, what is very critical, that hand-holding, that making them deploy projects in a very bankable model, which can help them as energy startups unlock further financing. Because energy entrepreneurs and being able to solve this energy challenge, it has to be, I believe, my opinion, that the key to solving this energy access challenge and mobilizing the relevant financing is solving it through a bankable model. So how can we ensure that we have new entrants into new energy startups springing up, those who are already currently established, how can they scale their businesses? How can they grow their businesses? And so this sort of financing is very critical, and we have seen tremendous success. Millions, thousands, tens of thousands of connections have been achieved to low income households and small businesses, and this is one way. We could call it a challenge or a program that just ensures that across the value chain, energy startups and those who run energy startups, energy entrepreneurs, are given the relevant hand-holding, business support, strategy, financial modeling. All of these would come into the play for them to be able, on how, even how do they identify their market? How can they incentivize and improve the economic capacity of people living in these rural communities to pay for their electricity? So all of these are things that can bring this home, granularize it, make us begin to see tangible impact. And that's the kind of innovative kind of financing models, because on one end, it goes in as catalytic funding and it unlocks even foreign direct investment. In Nigeria today, we have done a little above $8 million, but we have seen this unlock over $35 million in follow-on financing, scaling the impacts of these companies, of course, answering the very critical question of energy access. So,
including for those on really low incomes.
Of course.
Because that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How can they afford it? And Julius, I know you've been looking at some really interesting models around productive uses. Do you want to share that with us?
Absolutely, Harriet. Thank you so much. So what does energy access mean for a farmer whose incomes are very seasonal, right? In Uganda, we are very happy to have 2 rain seasons, but I know in sub-Saharan Africa, there are countries that actually only experience 1 season. So do you want to be able to serve these markets with the typical kind of financing that usually we get to see from typical financial institutions? Obviously, that's not going to work. If somebody's only going to be able to, let's say, harvest twice a year, how do you offer them the right repayment model if they are going to take these technologies on credit? And I want to highlight this as a very, very important issue, especially for smallholder farmers. I believe 80% of people in sub-Saharan Africa actually are employed in the agriculture sector. So how can we be able to serve these kinds of communities that have seasonal incomes? I strongly believe entrepreneurship is part of the solution for this. We want to be able to serve farmers to also take advantage of these new existing technologies that can actually help them, for example, improve their yields. What we are seeing currently is a very low uptake of these technologies. There's a huge focus around innovation, creating these technologies. And I believe we need to also pay a lot more attention on how to actually make these technologies accessible by smallholder farmers.
And I think you have a very brilliant model where if a farmer can't afford, for example, to buy a solar pump, there's an entrepreneur in the village who's renting it out to David today, to Julius tomorrow, to Jem the next day. And so the entrepreneur is able to pay back the loan for the solar pump, and the farmers don't have to own it. They can just loan it for a day. I think it's a really great model. But I wanted to bring Jem in here about this question of adaptation finance. So we've heard the case for it, in particular to ensure we can bring energy to people in the last mile. But why adaptation? Why not argue for other kinds of finance? What do you think?
I mean, I think it goes back to the original proposition of this session and the campaign, which is energy access is so fundamentally linked to adaptation, right? Energy is a silver lining, as they say. I mean, it's the thing that weaves through so many different development agendas, and so I think the challenge that we have is that we haven't yet quite convincingly articulated what that linkage is between energy access and adaptation and resilience. And I think we need to do a much better job because, I hate to say it here at COP, but we are most likely going to blow through our 1.5 degree target. And so adaptation and resilience is going to become that much more important. And I think it's incumbent on all sectors to think about how they are going to enable and contribute to further adaptation and resilience. And energy access, like many other inputs, is critical to that, whether it's agriculture, cold chain, healthcare, diversification of income. The list goes on. And so I think what's critical is that it's not seen as we're taking money away from adaptation and resilience. It's actually how do we crowd in more finance and create those linkages between sectors. And I think that's really I used to work in this sector back when there wasn't an SDG 7 target during the Millennium Development Goals. We were really good back then at linking energy with other development goals because we had to. We kind of become a little bit complacent now that we have our own quote-unquote development goal. And so I really think it's a incumbent on on this sector to work in partnership with other sectors, whether it's health, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the jobs agenda. I mean, if you're a politician or a government planner or policymaker here in Africa, one of your main agendas is jobs more than anything else. So we have to kind of translate our issues into the speak of those, you know, constituencies, those partners that we're trying to help. So I don't know if that was helpful.
That was very helpful, and I think it's been quite a theme of this COP in the side events about the importance of us all working out of our silos and really talking to each other and seeing the opportunities. Despite the crisis and how negative it is, nonetheless putting our arguments in terms of the opportunities, in particular for jobs and livelihoods. What else, Julius, do you think that civil society should be doing differently? Jem's put down some challenges. What else do you think civil society should be doing?
Yes, so I think civil societies really need to do a lot more advocacy. I'll give you an example. I think now with the unfortunate Ukraine war, I'm very worried that some of the, you know, for example, players in this space might change, you know, their attention to this war. There's even a higher risk of, you know, maybe governments, especially in the West, you know, holding on to some of that funding that should actually be coming to areas like Sub-Saharan Africa because of the Ukraine war. So we need a lot more advocacy coming in from civil society organizations. We need to see a lot more work happening together, more collaboration. We do quite a bit of work in the refugee settlements. We need to see a lot more advocacy for that kind of work. So yes, that is what I would say. Thank you.
Okay, let me bring in David and then Jem.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Julius. Excellent roles that civil society can take. I also think that in trying to achieve, you know, the SDGs, you know, and just like Jim had mentioned, energy is an enabler, you know, and so it doesn't work independent of itself. You know, it powers health, education, agriculture, you name it, you know, and so in one role that civil society can play, you know, working in those rural communities is be able to serve as that linkage, you know, between the rural communities and also the industry, you know, capacity building, providing relevant knowledge to even those smallholder farmers on how they can improve their activities, they can improve their yield, cannot be overemphasized. While doing that as well, you also need to critically think about how you can create sustainable business models. Now, I give you a practical example. When a farmer farms in a community and even if you improve his yield, he doesn't make the most money like the person who operates like a farmer that carries out agro-processing activities, because then when you can turn products from raw products to a more semi-finished or finished good, it improves their yield, it improves their financial capacity. So civil societies need to also look at incentive ways, other ways, think outside the box on how they can ensure that they take it from those who they're supporting, take it from just one step to multiple steps higher that can improve their income, improve their level. And we also need to always think inwards. Nobody is going to come from anywhere to solve the solutions, you know, and so solve the challenges that we have, you know. And as civil society, we also need to think critically, how can we solve our challenges from within? How can we do this in an innovative manner? How can we ensure that we create relevant business cases that can unlock further financing? So these are some of the things that I think that as civil society, we can provide that relevant hand-holding, you know, that can lead to transformative impact. Thank you.
Wow, that's quite a challenge for us all in the days to come. So I'm just going to ask Jem, who I can see is hungry to come in, and then I'm going to hope that you guys are equally hungry to come in with your comments and questions. Jem.
Now, I think David kind of is alluding to this really important issue around self-reliance and self-determination. And just to kind of build on this point around kind of how do we develop an ecosystem, how do we develop a market driven by entrepreneurship. The good news is, to date, the off-grid sector, which is kind of those companies deploying solar home systems to companies, to households and communities, have reached about 500 million connections to date. The thing is that the lion's share of those connections are being delivered by a small handful of companies. And yet we know that if we're going to achieve universal energy access, we probably need orders of magnitude more entrepreneurs, more developers. And my fear is that we are kind of forgetting that there's this huge base of local entrepreneurs, local companies, businesses, individuals in the global south that we need to cultivate and support, because these are the businesses that understand their communities best. And so when the lion's share of financing and technical assistance goes to a handful of 6 or 7 companies, that's worrying. And so we need to kind of help particularly local companies and entrepreneurs, civil society organizations, be those kind of leading companies that deliver solutions. And we need more patient, you kind of asked Harriet, what sort of financing do we need? We need more patient capital. We've seen a pretty significant increase in debt going to companies, but we're not seeing as much patient capital as along with some grants and TA to kind of cultivate and provide some of these enterprise development support. If I may, just one other kind of off-topic comment. One of the things that I've noticed here at COP, a bit of discussion, is really about resilience, but it's a slightly different form of resilience. One of the things that the pandemic has taught us about resilience is the fragility of supply chains. And I'm hearing a lot more discussion, which I'm quite happy about, is how do we potentially build up the manufacturing base here in Africa to begin supplying some of these distributed renewable energy technologies that we know we need to scale up energy access. And so I think that's something to really look out for, because there's a huge potential from a jobs point of view, but also from a resilience point of view in terms of shortening these supply chains.
Great points there on which to work in the future. Made in Africa for Africa. Also this point, both from you and Julius, about really, and from you, David, actually, about let's support local entrepreneurs and help build them up, including among refugee communities. And I think that's also been a bit of a theme of this COP, seeing more people from refugee entrepreneurs themselves arguing the case for investment as the people best placed to help take energy out. But now, who's got a question? Who wants to win this lovely T-shirt? And I'm really looking to see who wants to raise their hand. Anybody? Yay! Well done, at the back. The man at the back. And don't forget online, pop your questions in the chat.
Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to share your stories with us today. My name is Thomas, and I'm from New York. But I'm starting a global innovation lab focused on community-owned solutions in different parts of the world. And honestly, this decentralized energy trend is starting to pick up steam. But as Jem mentioned, still a lot of these decentralized energy companies are still owned by these 6 or 7 different folks. So I'm curious if you have some models that you can share around. I've been learning a lot about cooperatives, where folks in a community are actually investing in a technology and then receiving the return directly back to them. I'm curious if you've seen sort of ownership models that are specific to share and that we can learn from.
Yeah, maybe I can take that on. Yeah, so great work. Actually, at New Energy Nexus, what we focus on is, maybe just to add on what Jem mentioned, is, and this is why this is so important, for energy access to really, for us to be able to take it to the next level, we really need to start focusing on a diverse range of entrepreneurs if we are going to be able to make great headway. So I'll give you an example for cooperatives. At New Energy Nexus, we've been able to work with what are known as village savings and loan associations to really bring these technologies closer to communities and sustainably. These kinds of entrepreneurs can be able to come up with very unique financial innovations that the 6 companies may not be able to come up with. I'll give you an example. A cooperative could easily use a cow as collateral. The big companies may not be able to do that. And this is why we really need to advocate for more diverse entrepreneurs. Some of these entrepreneurs are going to really help us to make quite significant gains when it comes to energy access. So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much for your question. Thinking through your question, the truth is, for you to see the emergence of new companies on the scene, it takes time. Because, for example, you see a company who may have a fancy product in the market, but that product has gone through multiple levels of iteration before they have gotten. I'll give you a practical example with one of the companies that we supported that does a mobile power solution, and the current version in the market is the 9th iteration, and monies have been spent, they initially made some, they blew up, they revised it, they blew up. So getting most of these companies on the scene would take time, and that's why I think that even those who are financing, and just like Jim mentioned, patient capital. We're not trying to say we should just flush monies down the toilet, no, but we need this sort of financing, because companies will be at various stages. Those are the startup stage, scale-up stage, growth stage. So at every stage, there need to be funding facilities that match their level, that match where they are at. So we need some sort of monies that will turn idea to product. And sometimes some ideas do not translate to fantastic products in just a short time. So it takes a while, but we need to have models that are substantive, that are willing to ensure that the emergence of these sort of entities that would scale the solutions, that would provide the solutions to the challenges that we have, at least emerge. And one thing I also like to mention here, especially for young people who are listening in, is the truth is, from the work that I do, I have seen that you need to have some resilience if you're going to do anything tangible. Nothing worth celebrating comes easy, and so you need to stay at it, even if it fails, you need to keep at it, you need to keep trying, because really you would meet some challenges across the way, you would experience some failures, but just know that if your solution scales, lives are being transformed, lives are being saved. You're literally having a tremendous impact, which would outlive you, and so it's just important that you stay at it. Don't be disgruntled by the challenges that you face, but you need to keep at it. And so resilience is a very key factor. Thank you.
So Jem, given all those problems, and given, as you say, we need patient capital, but in fact, most capital's very impatient, and they're focused on results, and they don't have much compassion, frankly, when things go wrong. What is it we can do to help make that transition, to make these impatient capital more patient?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it is helping investors and financiers understand these business models better. In many ways, these are relatively new and innovative business models, and I'm referring kind of to the distributed renewable energy sector as it relates to off-grid settings and pay-as-you-go. These are all kind of models that have emerged over the last 10 years, and so there's a lot of learning that's still going on, including among some of the providers of capital. And so I think what we're beginning to see is second, third generation lessons kind of cycling through the system, and it's kind of really ultimately important for these financiers to understand the fundamentals of these business models so that they can provide the right kind of capital. And this is one of the things that we at SC for All have historically been doing, is through some analytical work called Energizing Finance. We've been tracking the financing flows of capital, as well as the financing needs and the disbursements. And surprise, surprise, we're not getting enough finance flows, to David's point, we need a capital continuum, yet we're seeing gaps in that continuum. So we need to build this ecosystem of financial providers that have a solution along that continuum. And then we have to hold these institutions and providers of capital accountable, which kind of gets to the third point, which is we're seeing a significant gap between commitment and disbursement. And so this is something that we will keep kind of drumming the beat, beating the drum on this issue, because as I mentioned earlier, sure, there were a lot of great commitments that I alluded to made here, but we have to hold these organizations really accountable and make sure the money is flowing and they're reaching the actual companies.
Yeah, it's back to that accountability point you raised earlier, David. But I'm going to bring in some of the questions from online. Grace, is it you? Is it? And if anyone else in the room wants to ask a question, lovely, thank you, let me know, because we're nearing our time.
Thank you. So, Power Up is making a link between adaptation funding and finance and energy access. Can you comment on how finance should be packaged for on-access companies?
Who wants to take that one? Ooh.
Sorry?
How can adaptation finance for energy access companies best be linked? Is that the question?
Exactly.
Be packaged up. Who feels ready to take that? David's leaping in.
Okay, so I think that we have even answered this question in the course of our conversation. And what do I mean by that? We have talked about various innovative models that needs to happen through the financing, through the way we finance projects, through the way we finance this very important topic, And so, first of all, we just need to, like Jem had earlier mentioned, identify who are those funders. What are currently what are even the adaptation funding programs that we have today? Who are those that have committed to funding adaptation? How do they want to fund it? Do they need some level of, could I call it explanation, or some much more information about how they could better structure it? Because maybe what they have identified as the structure may not be able to scale in the way and manner it ought to. So those are the things that we need to just identify. Those who are playing in those spaces, how do they want to go with their program? Are there ways that we can further advise them on ways they can better implement it? And boom, we track the success along the line.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'd like to ask this gentleman, then this gentleman, and I need a woman. Come on. Is there a woman asking a question online? No? Hard to say. Is there a woman in the room who would like to ask a question? But off to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Aliyu Sadiq, and I'm from Nigeria. So we provide innovative solutions to address issues around waste in Nigeria. So I came late. I don't know if it has been addressed before my coming, but I'll just have to ask this question. Yeah, the conversation has been around climate solutions, energy access, but then lots of startups I've seen around renewable energy, clean solutions are mostly focused on solar, and solutions are mostly generalized. They are not locally specific, targeted at community challenges. Like solutions around, currently in Nigeria, we have lots of abattoirs who, during the process of meat processing, you have the disposal of the intestines with lots of enteric fermentation that also causes methane. And the process of this processing of the meats are really, really unsustainable. So what are some of those locally driven energy access solutions that are locally targeted, not just the bigger solar solutions?
It's a great question. I'm going to ask you guys to think about your answers. Well, I also take this question, and I'm still looking for a woman in the room. Otherwise, we're going to hope that one of the ones online is a woman. So.
Hello. Also, thank you so much for this lovely talk here. My name is Tobias. I'm a student from Germany. And I was asking myself, like in Germany, the biggest challenge we're having for renewables is actually the legal framework and having enough skilled workers. You were talking loads about the financing. So what would be sort of the second biggest challenge you would say you're facing for having enough energy access for everyone?
Brilliant question around skills and training. Are we skilling up the future generation that we need for this green revolution of the future? We're taking one of the online questions then, Grace. And we're hoping it's from a woman.
Maybe if it's a woman channeling the question, then it counts. So the question is, what would the panel like to see happen between this COP and the next to accelerate energy access?
Well, so we've got 3 cracking questions. Each of you can answer the ones you feel most appropriate and also make your final wrap-up comment, which actually that question is perfectly positioning you to do. Who's going to kick off first? Why don't we start with Jem and come back towards me?
Maybe I'll take the gentleman's question around what's other than finance, what else is needed? I mean, there's a lot needed, but I think human and institutional capacity is a big one. It currently serves as a brake on progress and results in higher transaction costs because anytime we want to do anything, we often rely on expensive folks from outside of countries to fly in and write reports, develop business models, even run companies. And sure, some of that is needed. But I see a number of capacity gaps within countries that need filling. And it kind of goes back to this earlier issue, the mention of self-determination and self-reliance. Whether it be planning and policy, we need to build the capacity of ministries of energy, rural energy agencies to do better energy planning, statistics, developing smarter policies and regulations that help crowd in investment. I already mentioned entrepreneurship. I think that's a critical one. And I don't see this as a challenge. I see this as an opportunity for jobs. And so that's the one thing that I would highlight.
And the one to take to the next COP as well. Julius.
Yes, so from my end, actually, the biggest challenge I see is we still need to have a comprehensive understanding of what's really needed beyond being able to create a very good solar panel or beyond being able to have a good battery. I wish that, we could develop also additional understanding in terms of what does it really take to have these technologies be able to reach, because in many cases we see a lot of players really stop at, okay, now, like somebody mentioned, we have these 6 companies and we are going to give them X amount to be able to solve this problem. In my opinion, it goes beyond just being able to bring these technologies to market, but to really help communities access and also be able to actually afford to have them. And I wish, as a continent, we can be able to quickly move through this energy ladder and start to use energy for things that go beyond lighting and phone charging and a couple of other things. Thank you.
Which was that great question. Thank you, Julius. David, last wrap-up comment from you.
Great. I mean, those are fantastic questions. Thank you. Talking about in response to the question from the man from Nigeria, Sadiq, excellent question. I think that we need to understand that, first of all, there's the technology. And so as the technology advances, people will advance. There's also the commercials around it. So, for example, we have deployed cold storage containerized solutions, in different clusters. Maybe more energy startups need to identify these abattoirs as possible business models, that they can deploy containerized or solar-powered solutions for, and that's one thing that would be able to solve it. Also, there's also a knowledge gap because people cannot deploy technology that they do not understand, you know, and so there's still that significant knowledge gap across sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to the various technologies, and some are much more commercially viable than the others, and so that would influence a lot of business decisions. Just to wrap up in a few seconds, from COP27 to COP28, I just need to see more action, you know, and while we've listened to all the pledges, we see a lot of initiatives. What I want everyone to do, you know, as we advance to COP28, is to be able to monitor the implementation of some of these announcements, these initiatives that have been announced, and let us do a proper stock taking by mid-year, or just 6 months after now, and see where we are at and where we are at on the road to COP28. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience and our fantastic panel for all that inspiration as well as clarity about absolutely some of the solutions, some of the things we've got to do between now and the next COP, and of course way beyond. One thing also that all of you can do is, of course, join the Power Up campaign and help be part of creating that momentum so that access to energy really does rise up the agenda, and we see more commitments, more finance, and as we said, more implementation. Finally, to end, I'd just like to say that through a highly objective and rigorous process, I have decided that the winner of the T-shirt is, in fact, our student friend from Germany. And with that, I would like to say congratulations in particular to the panel.
Thank you so much, Harriet, and thanks to all of our panelists. The next session will be starting in 5 minutes, and it will be on uniting together to harness the power of the sun. So see you all back here in 5 minutes.